In a world obsessed with fossil fuels, struggling to escape its own addiction to oil, one man's invention promised to rewrite the laws of energy forever. His name Maxwell Chikumbutso. A name once whispered in small engineering circles in Africa, now echoing in the boardrooms of Beijing. Because today, China has done what the United States could not. They've beaten the world to Maxwell's energy revolution. And it all revolves around three mysterious letters, MSED. 4 years, governments, scientists, and corporations have called free energy impossible. They've mocked inventors who dared to defy physics. But behind closed doors, something incredible was happening, and it all started with a small garage in Zimbabwe. Maxwell Chikumbutso had built what no one thought could exist, a device capable of generating continuous power without fuel, without sunlight, and without an external source. He called it the MSED, the micro self-energizing device. At first, no one took him seriously. African media covered his claims, while Western outlets ignored him completely. But when videos surfaced showing his devices powering cars, homes, and generators, eyes began to turn east. Because while America was busy questioning, China was quietly acting. Sources close to engineering circles in Shenzhen and Hangzhou began whispering about a secret agreement. Chinese energy officials had allegedly reached out to Maxwell, offering something the West never would: full-scale industrial backing, advanced research labs, and unrestricted development rights. Not just a partnership, but a national commitment to make the MSED a cornerstone of China's next-generation energy infrastructure. While American corporations debated intellectual property and patent legitimacy, China was already testing prototypes, scaling the technology, experimenting with industrial integration, and quietly filing secondary patents under new Chinese consortiums. What was once a dream in Zimbabwe had now become a multi-billion-dollar state initiative. And the US? Left on the sidelines, shocked that they'd lost another technological frontier, this time, not in AI, not in chips, but in energy itself. Imagine this. Factories in Guangdong powered by self-sustaining MSED clusters. Electric vehicles charging themselves as they drive. Entire neighborhoods running without power grids. Not in 2050, but possibly within this decade. That's the future China is now chasing. And according to insiders, they've already tested MSED-based systems that can power small manufacturing lines continuously for weeks without any external input. If true, it's a paradigm shift that could destabilize the world's energy markets overnight. Oil, gas, nuclear, everything could change. And that's exactly what worries Western leaders. See, Maxwell's technology isn't just an invention. It's a weapon of disruption. A technology that can render fossil fuels obsolete and cripple the trillion-dollar energy industry. And the fact that China may now control it sends shockwaves through the global power balance. In 2022, a team of engineers from Nanjing reportedly tested a modified MSED generator capable of producing sustained 5 kilowatts without fuel. Those results, though never officially released, were allegedly sent to Beijing's Energy Council for classified review. By mid-2024, unconfirmed reports suggested China had signed an exclusive research development contract with Seth Holdings, Maxwell's innovation company. If this is true, it's one of the most secretive and strategic technology deals of the 21st century. But why would Maxwell choose China? Why not America, the so-called land of innovation? The answer is simple: freedom to build. For years, inventors like him have faced skepticism, censorship, and even threats when their ideas challenged the system. China, on the other hand, offered something different: a chance to prove it works, without red tape, without interference. And Maxwell knew, once the MSED is proven, the whole world will follow. The US government's response so far has been silence. Officially, the Department of Energy has not recognized any working self-energizing devices. Unofficially, analysts say Washington fears a tech sovereignty crisis where China leads the world not just in electric vehicles or solar, but in energy independence itself. Because if MSED works, oil loses its throne. Petrodollars lose their power. And energy becomes free. Imagine what that means. For nations trapped in fuel poverty. For villages off the grid. For countries crippled by debt from oil imports. The MSED could be liberation. And it's China, not the West, leading that revolution. But what exactly is inside the MSED? Maxwell never fully disclosed the technology, but engineers describe it as a hybrid between a magnetic resonance generator and a nanostructured capacitor array capable of capturing and recycling electromagnetic potential at near-zero loss. It's not perpetual motion, it's smart energy feedback at quantum efficiency. And if that's real, it's the beginning of a new era. In early 2025, leaked documents reportedly surfaced showing test facilities in Chengdu experimenting with large-scale MSED arrays labeled under a state renewable project codenamed Phoenix. Coincidence? Maybe. But what's not coincidence is the sudden silence that followed. Videos disappeared. Websites went offline. And soon after, new patents appeared under Chinese energy research divisions, filed just weeks later. Coincidence? Or confirmation? For the first time in history, China might hold the key to infinite energy, a dream that Western scientists once laughed at, but can no longer ignore. And the irony? The idea was born not in Silicon Valley, not in MIT, but in Africa. An African inventor, backed by China, may have just changed the global order forever. If the MSED becomes real, China won't just dominate manufacturing. It will dominate energy, technology, and economics in a way the world has never seen. And for the US, that's more than competition. It's a crisis. Because this isn't just about power, it's about control. Control of nations. Control of industries. Control of the future. The next global race isn't for oil, lithium, or chips. It's for infinite energy. And this time, China is already in the lead. But the story doesn't end here. Because behind the scenes, other countries are taking notice. India, Brazil, and even the European Union are quietly investigating MSED-based research. Everyone wants a piece of the new energy pie. The question now is, will Maxwell's vision remain pure, a gift for humanity? Or will it become another tool of power, locked behind patents and politics? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear. The era of fossil dominance is ending. And the spark that began in a small African garage is now blazing across the world, led by China. Rumors began to circulate across diplomatic channels. Inside closed-door meetings in Washington, officials debated whether Maxwell's collaboration with China could represent the single biggest technological shift since the discovery of electricity itself. Some dismissed it as hype. Others saw it for what it truly was, a potential endgame for the fossil fuel economy. Intelligence reports hinted that China had moved portions of the MSED project into high-security research zones, the same way they did with their quantum computing initiatives. The secrecy was suffocating. Foreign engineers who once collaborated online suddenly went silent. Research servers were scrubbed clean. Satellite imagery showed new facilities being built in Inner Mongolia. Flat metallic roof structures surrounded by solar fields and electromagnetic shielding towers. The official narrative? Advanced renewable energy testing grounds. But insiders knew better. They were watching the birth of the MSED integration program. Meanwhile, whispers began emerging from within Maxwell's inner circle that he was no longer in open communication with Western partners. Some say he relocated to a Chinese research city under a special guest innovation visa. Others claim he chose silence after receiving multiple warnings from global energy interests urging him to pause development for safety evaluation. But Maxwell was never one to stop. He once said, "You can't silence an idea whose time has come." And now, his idea was reshaping the map of global energy power. Chinese state media began teasing vague announcements: breakthrough in clean autonomous energy. No direct mention of Maxwell. No mention of MSED. Just quiet confidence broadcast in subtle tones. But to those who knew how to listen, it was confirmation. China had it. They were scaling it. And they were ready to change everything. Across the Pacific, American research institutions scrambled. Teams at MIT, Caltech, and DARPA started revisiting archived patents and experimental data on zero-point and electromagnetic energy recovery systems. Something that had been dismissed as pseudoscience for decades was suddenly being treated as national priority. Funding poured into advanced resonance generators and closed-loop power systems. The race was on. But the truth was they were already late. China wasn't just experimenting. They were manufacturing. Leaked trade manifests revealed shipments of specialized alloys and superconducting materials moving between Chinese provinces under classified project codes. Industrial supply companies were quietly rerouted to state energy contractors. By the time the world caught wind, entire assembly lines were operational. What made the MSED so unstoppable wasn't just its design, it was its simplicity. Once the blueprint existed, replication was inevitable. All it took was one working unit, and the dominoes began to fall. Private Chinese companies started hinting at grid-independent homes. Tech startups promised cars that never plug in. And the global oil markets began to shake. Brent crude prices started fluctuating violently, not because of production drops, but because investors were afraid of something far more dangerous: irrelevance. Energy analysts on Wall Street called it the Maxwell shock. But in truth, it wasn't Maxwell alone. It was the perfect storm: an African inventor, a Chinese state willing to take the risk, and a world unprepared for an energy system that didn't need control. Governments rely on fuel dependency as leverage. Energy is more than electricity, it's power in the political sense. When a country controls energy, it controls the economy beneath it. But if energy becomes free, who controls what? That question began haunting policymakers worldwide. A silent panic spread across think tanks, defense agencies, and corporate boardrooms. Some saw it as salvation, an end to scarcity. Others saw it as chaos, an end to control. Meanwhile, deep inside one of China's research cities, a new MSED prototype reportedly went online. It powered an entire research complex for 72 continuous hours without external input. No solar, no wind, no battery depletion. The data was recorded, encrypted, and transmitted to Beijing under the code name Dragon Pulse. That's when things truly changed. Shortly afterward, multiple African tech organizations reported sudden cyber attacks. Data servers connected to Maxwell's earlier projects went offline. Speculation grew that Western intelligence agencies were trying to access blueprints to understand or sabotage the system. But China was already 3 steps ahead. They had sealed Maxwell's technology within their own digital fortress. The MSED had become more than an invention, it was a state secret. Across Africa, a new wave of interest ignited. Engineers, students, and scientists began studying Maxwell's work again, seeing it not just as one man's genius but as a symbol of African potential, a message that the next revolution didn't have to come from the West. In Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, small research teams started developing open-source replicas of the MSED concept, hoping to make it freely available before it was monopolized by governments. And China watched carefully. They weren't just protecting technology. They were protecting a strategic future. With MSED tech, China could power entire manufacturing zones without dependence on coal or oil. They could decarbonize industries faster than any climate agreement could ever mandate. And in doing so, they could position themselves as the global energy superpower, not by exporting fuel but by exporting the blueprint of independence. In Washington, panic turned to action. Reports surfaced that the US initiated Project Lumina, a fast-tracked energy initiative to counter China's advancements. Billions were redirected from conventional renewables into classified labs working on magnetoelectric resonance systems, the closest approximation of MSED theory. But no matter how much money they poured in, they couldn't replicate what Maxwell built. Because MSED wasn't born from bureaucracy. It was born from vision and intuition. Maxwell once described his invention as guided inspiration. He believed that nature itself holds a perfect balance of electromagnetic energy and that all he did was learn how to listen to it. To China, this was innovation. To the US, it was disruption. To the world, it might be salvation. But as the months passed, things got even stranger. Satellite data from Chinese provinces showed unexplained electromagnetic surges in certain regions. Massive yet stable power signatures were detected, too regular to be solar, too consistent to be wind. Experts speculated that China had begun deploying MSED clusters as national energy nodes, quietly replacing sections of their grid with self-sustaining power units, one province at a time. The implications were staggering. An energy network immune to blackouts, grid failures, or international sanctions. A power system that could operate indefinitely, independent, untraceable, and perfectly balanced. For the first time in modern history, China could claim complete energy sovereignty. And that changed everything. Because while the world argued about geopolitics and trade wars, China had quietly built a wall. No one could breach, a wall made not of steel or firewalls, but of pure energy independence. Maxwell's invention, once seen as fringe, had become the foundation of a new empire. But deep down, one question remained unanswered: what does Maxwell himself think of all this? He had always said his dream was to give the world free energy, not to give one nation dominance. And as whispers continue about him living under strict research confidentiality, many wonder if he still controls his own creation, or if he's become a prisoner of the power his device unleashed. The global balance is shifting faster than anyone predicted. Old powers are trembling. New alliances are forming. And humanity stands at a crossroads between liberation and control, between innovation and exploitation. Because in the end, the MSED is more than technology. It's a mirror reflecting who we are as a species, and what we'll do when handed the keys to infinite energy. As whispers of the MSED breakthrough began spreading across the globe, governments scrambled to verify what was real and what was rumor. Intelligence agencies in Europe and North America launched covert investigations. Private satellites were repositioned. Data analysts were told to look for energy anomalies, sudden drops in grid demand, or unexplained electromagnetic patterns near China's new industrial zones. At first, the results were inconclusive. But then came the spikes. Every few weeks, specific regions in mainland China showed consistent patterns: small towns consuming almost no external electricity, manufacturing clusters with near-zero fossil use, and districts where electric vehicle charging stations remained operational even during national grid maintenance. The math didn't add up. If these readings were accurate, then China wasn't just testing MSED units. They were deploying them. And once deployment began, there was no turning back. Energy analysts worldwide began revising projections. Some predicted global oil demand could fall by 30% within 5 years. Others warned of economic collapse in nations dependent on oil exports. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries convened emergency meetings, trying to assess what a post-MSED world might look like. But China stayed silent. Every official press release avoided specifics. Every spokesperson redirected questions to ongoing clean energy developments. Every data leak was immediately contained. Then, out of nowhere, an obscure patent appeared in a Chinese database. Filed under a state research group, it described a self-replenishing electromagnetic power unit. The technical language was vague, almost intentionally cryptic. But experts recognized the pattern: the energy feedback loop, the resonance harmonics, the nanolayered conductors. It was MSED. Hidden in plain sight. The Western media erupted. Commentators accused China of stealing intellectual property. Politicians demanded transparency. Yet none could prove anything concrete. Because every piece of evidence was wrapped in legality, shielded by trade laws, and filed under Chinese sovereignty. The game had changed. For the first time in modern history, energy was no longer a commodity. It was becoming a capability, something that could be built, not bought. Across Africa, new discussions began. Economists called it the Great Reversal. For decades, Africa supplied raw materials to the world: oil, cobalt, lithium. But if MSED worked, those exports would lose value. Instead, African nations would need to build internal systems: localized, decentralized energy independence. And that's where Maxwell's original dream resurfaced. Groups of young African engineers began forming independent collectives. Some were funded by small community grants. Others were backed quietly by Chinese partners seeking to expand MSED deployment under the banner of tech cooperation. Workshops in Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya started assembling experimental units inspired by Maxwell's early prototypes. For the first time, the idea of true energy freedom wasn't science fiction. It was a project plan. Meanwhile, in Washington, think tanks went into overdrive. Analysts warned that if the US failed to catch up, global influence would erode permanently. The dollar's stability, once tied to oil, would crumble. Entire defense systems based on fuel logistics could become obsolete. Behind closed doors, the US government began reaching out not to China, but to Africa. Offers were made. Research partnerships proposed. Funding promised. Anything to bring Maxwell back under Western influence. But no one could confirm where he was. Some said he remained in China under strict confidentiality. Others claimed he had gone completely off-grid, refusing all communication. One rumor, however, stood out that Maxwell had created a new version of the MSED, smaller and more stable than anything China possessed. A portable module that could fit inside a suitcase, capable of powering a house indefinitely. If true, it would mean the technology had evolved beyond control, a seed that could spread anywhere, instantly replicable, impossible to contain. That's when strange things began happening. Unidentified packages started appearing in global tech hubs, small crates marked only with a symbol, 3 concentric circles surrounding a lightning bolt. Inside were incomplete schematics, fragments of code, and handwritten notes signed simply MC. The blueprints weren't enough to build a full MSED, but they were enough to make engineers curious. Universities began analyzing them in secret. Startups tried to simulate the feedback patterns digitally. And within months, new variations of energy harvesting circuits began popping up in research journals, each one eerily similar to the MSED concept. Maxwell's idea had gone viral. China couldn't contain it. The US couldn't suppress it. The MSED had escaped into the world. It was now a global movement, open source energy. Communities started organizing hackathons to improve the design. Social media channels formed under anonymous banners. #FreeTheEnergy, #MSEDRevolution, #MaxwellLegacy. Thousands of people began building their own miniature prototypes, crude, unstable, but undeniably functional. And suddenly, power was no longer centralized. In rural villages, farmers built small generators that never shut off. In urban slums, families wired up light grids that never needed recharging. Energy independence was spreading like wildfire, invisible, unstoppable, decentralized. But not everyone was celebrating. Corporations that once controlled the world's power infrastructure began to panic. Utility giants filed lawsuits against independent inventors. Governments passed new energy safety laws to regulate homemade devices. And in a desperate move, a coalition of global energy firms announced the creation of a unified energy security alliance, a front meant to ensure safe global energy transition. But the public saw through it. They knew what it really was, an attempt to re-establish control. Meanwhile, China continued expanding its influence, offering partnerships to countries adopting MSED-based technologies. They promised energy independence under global cooperation. But every agreement included one condition: data sharing. Through these deals, China wasn't just spreading energy technology. They were building a network, a real-time map of global power flows. Energy had become the new internet. Whoever controlled its flow, controlled the future. And in the middle of it all, the man who started it, Maxwell Chikumbutso, remained silent. No interviews. No appearances. Only the occasional cryptic message shared through anonymous forums hinting that he was watching the awakening. Those who analyzed the messages noticed patterns, phrases encoded in binary sequences that, when translated, formed coordinates. Each coordinate pointed to a location: a desert in Namibia, a mountain site in Tibet, a valley in Chile. All remote. All rumored to house independent MSED test sites. It was as if Maxwell was orchestrating a silent revolution, not through nations, but through individuals. The energy revolution was no longer a race between superpowers. It was a revolution of people. And that's what terrified governments most. Because when power, literal and political, becomes free, control dissolves. Economies built on scarcity collapse. Systems built on dependency vanish. And from that void a new world begins to form, unpredictable, unstoppable, and entirely self-sustaining. The MSED had started as a machine. But now it was a movement. A symbol of humanity's refusal to be dependent any longer. Whether the MSED becomes a working reality or remains a dream, one truth stands above everything: the search for infinite, clean, and accessible energy will define humanity's next chapter. Every discovery begins as an idea. Every breakthrough starts with a person willing to imagine something better. Maxwell's vision, the idea that power could be generated without waste, without fuel, without pollution, speaks to the deepest human desire: independence. It represents a future where no one is left in the dark. Where energy isn't a privilege, but a right. Maybe China's version of that future will look different. Maybe the United States, Europe, and Africa will find their own paths. But competition can become cooperation. What begins as rivalry can become the spark of global change. Across the world, new generations of engineers are studying energy systems not just to make money, but to make meaning, to create technology that heals the planet rather than harms it. Whether through MSED, fusion, solar, or something entirely new, humanity is on the verge of freeing itself from the limits of the past. In the end, it's not about who wins the race. It's about whether we can build a world where everyone has light, power, and opportunity without destroying the earth in the process. That is the real revolution. And that, more than anything else, is the energy breakthrough worth believing in.